I am Marcus Bennett. I am 32 years old and a product manager at Nanotech Industries. Or at least, I was until 3 months ago. But to understand why I walked away from a company I gave 7 years of my life to, you need to know how it all started. You need to know about the moment everything changed, the moment when those 3 words, maybe next year, became the catalyst for the biggest transformation of my life. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I finally decided to ask for what I deserved. The conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, and I remember thinking how small everything looked from up there. How insignificant. I had rehearsed my pitch 100 times in the mirror at home, practiced every word, every gesture. I had prepared a portfolio documenting every innovation I had brought to the company, every late night I had spent perfecting products that carried someone else's name. My boss, Richard Caldwell, sat across from me with his leather chair tilted back, his expensive watch catching the morning light. He was scrolling through his phone while I talked, occasionally nodding, barely listening. I could feel my confidence draining with every disinterested glance he gave me. When I finally finished my presentation, there was silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. "Marcus," he said, setting his phone down with theatrical slowness. "You do good work. Solid work. But leadership, that requires something more. Something you just don't have yet." He leaned forward, his smile patronizing, his eyes cold. "Maybe next year, when you've proven yourself a bit more, we can revisit this conversation." Those 3 words. Maybe next year. The same 3 words he had given me the year before. And the year before that. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been bending for far too long. But I didn't let it show. I smiled, thanked him for his time, and walked out of that conference room with my head high. Nobody in that building knew that I had just made a decision that would change everything. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my father. He had been a janitor at a tech company for 20 years, overlooked and invisible despite being one of the smartest people I ever knew. He used to come home with grease under his fingernails and tell me stories about the engineers who ignored him, the executives who walked past him like furniture. But he never became bitter. Instead, he taught me something that echoed in my mind that night. "Marcus, when doors stay closed, you don't keep knocking. You build something so undeniable that all doors become irrelevant." I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I had been secretly working on for 18 months. The AI software platform that would become Binnacle Solutions. The idea that Richard Caldwell had called unmarketable nonsense when I presented it in a strategy meeting 2 years ago. Everyone had laughed. Everyone had moved on. But I hadn't. I had taken that idea home, nurtured it, developed it in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when the world was asleep and my mind was loudest. The prototype was nearly complete. The architecture was revolutionary, combining machine learning with predictive analytics in ways that would make current industry standards obsolete. I had been testing it quietly, refining it, perfecting every line of code. And now, sitting in my apartment with Richard's dismissive words still ringing in my ears, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I opened a new document and typed out my resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice. Professional, courteous, brief. I didn't mention where I was going because I wasn't going anywhere. I was building something from nothing, and I was doing it without their permission, without their validation, without their maybe next year. The next morning, I printed the letter on crisp white paper, folded it into thirds, and placed it in an envelope. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. When I walked into Richard's office and handed him that envelope, I watched his eyebrows rise in surprise. He opened it right there, his eyes scanning the words, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "You're resigning," he said, as if the concept was absurd. "Marcus, don't be hasty. You're emotional about yesterday. Take a few days, think about it." "I have thought about it," I replied calmly. "For 7 years, actually. Thank you for the opportunity, Richard. I've learned everything I needed to learn here." The 2 weeks that followed were strange. I came to work every day, tied up loose ends, transferred my projects to other team members, and watched how quickly I became invisible. It's remarkable how fast a workplace forgets you when you're on your way out. Colleagues who used to stop by my desk for advice suddenly found other people to ask. Meetings I used to lead continued without me. It was like watching myself fade from a photograph in real time. But there was one person who noticed. Her name was Sienna Morris, and she was a junior developer who had joined Nanotech about 8 months earlier. She was brilliant, the kind of mind that saw solutions before others even understood the problems. Yet she was consistently overlooked, her ideas dismissed in meetings, her contributions credited to senior developers who barely acknowledged her existence. I saw myself in her, saw the frustration in her eyes during team meetings when her suggestions were ignored. On my last day, she approached my desk as I was packing my personal items into a small cardboard box. There wasn't much, just a coffee mug my father had given me, a small succulent plant that had somehow survived my sporadic watering, and a framed photo of my parents on their wedding day. "Can I ask you something?" Sienna said, her voice quiet, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "Why are you really leaving? Everyone says you're crazy to walk away from this job without having another one lined up." I looked at her for a long moment, considering how much to say. Then I smiled. Because I realized that waiting for someone else to see your value is a waste of time. If they can't see it, you find people who can. Or you build something that makes your value impossible to ignore. She nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in her expression. Understanding, maybe, or hope. I wrote my personal email address on a sticky note and handed it to her. If you ever need advice, or if you just want to talk about ideas, reach out. You're better than this place deserves. I carried my box out of Nanotech Industries that Friday afternoon, and I didn't look back. The security guard who had greeted me every morning for 7 years gave me a small wave. The receptionist barely glanced up. And just like that, I was gone. My apartment became my headquarters. I converted my bedroom into an office, set up 3 monitors on a desk I built from an old door and cinder blocks, and created a workspace that would have made any tech startup jealous. I had savings, enough to survive for maybe 8 months if I was careful. After that, I would need to figure something out. But I wasn't worried. For the first time in 7 years, I felt alive. The work consumed me. I woke up at 5 in the morning and coded until midnight. I ate meals at my desk, forgot what day of the week it was, lived in sweatpants and old t-shirts. The AI platform I was building wasn't just software, it was a revolution. It could predict market trends with 87% accuracy, automate processes that currently required entire teams, and learn from user behavior in ways that felt almost magical. I spent weekends refining the user interface, making it intuitive enough that anyone could use it but powerful enough that experts would be impressed. I tested every feature obsessively, broke things and rebuilt them, pushed the limits of what I thought was possible. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Binnacle Solutions began to take shape. 3 months after leaving Nanotech, I had a working beta. It was elegant, powerful, and unlike anything else in the market. Now I just needed to prove it worked. I reached out to a small manufacturing company that was struggling with inventory management, offered them a free trial, and held my breath. Within 2 weeks, they had reduced waste by 40% and increased efficiency by 35%. They wanted to pay me. They wanted to tell other companies about me. That was the beginning. Word spread quietly at first, then faster. A logistics company in Seattle. A retail chain in Austin. A healthcare provider in Boston. Every client became a reference. Every success story became proof that this wasn't just good, it was transformative. 6 months after leaving Nanotech, I hired my first employee. A developer I had worked with at my previous job who had been laid off and was looking for something new. Then another. Then 3 more. By month 10, Binnacle Solutions had 12 employees working out of a small office space I rented in a converted warehouse downtown. The exposed brick walls and industrial lighting made it feel more like an art studio than a tech company, but everyone loved it. We had bean-bag chairs and standing desks, a kitchen stocked with snacks, and a culture built on respect and innovation. I made it a point to know everyone's name, to understand their goals, to create an environment where ideas mattered more than hierarchy. Morning meetings were collaborative brainstorming sessions, not lectures from the top. When someone proposed an idea, we explored it together, built on it, refined it. No one was invisible here. No one was told, maybe next year. The revenue numbers started climbing faster than I had projected. Companies weren't just using our software, they were depending on it, integrating it into their core operations, recommending it to partners and competitors alike. Trade publications started noticing. Tech blogs wrote articles about the AI platform that came out of nowhere. Investment firms began reaching out, wanting meetings, offering capital. I remember the day we landed our first major client. A national retail chain with over 500 locations, struggling with supply chain issues that were costing them millions. They had tried everything, consulted with every major tech firm including Nanotech Industries. Nothing had worked. But they were willing to give us a shot, mostly because they were desperate and we were affordable. I personally oversaw the implementation, worked alongside their team for 3 weeks straight, customized our platform to fit their specific needs. When the system went live, the results were immediate and dramatic. Inventory accuracy improved by 60% in the first week. Shipping times decreased by 45%. Waste reduction exceeded all projections. Their CEO called me personally to say it was the best investment they had made in 5 years. That contract alone brought in enough revenue to triple our team size. We moved into a bigger office, hired specialists in different areas, brought in a CFO who understood scaling. But I never forgot where we came from. Every new employee received a handwritten welcome note from me. Every Friday, we had team lunches where everyone shared their wins and challenges. I built the company my father would have been proud to work for. Around month 14, something interesting started happening. People from Nanotech began reaching out to me. Not management, but the engineers, the developers, the project managers who had been my colleagues. They wanted to know if I was hiring. They wanted to escape the toxic culture, the credit stealing, the maybe next year promises that never materialized. Some of them I hired. Others I had to turn away because we weren't big enough yet, but I kept their information, promised to reach out when we were. One person I definitely hired was Sienna Morris. She called me on a Thursday evening, 8 months after I had left Nanotech. Her voice was tired, frustrated, defeated. "You were right," she said. "This place can't see value even when it's staring them in the face. Are you still hiring?" She became our lead developer within 6 months, proving herself to be exactly as brilliant as I had suspected. Under her leadership, our platform evolved, adding features I hadn't even imagined. She hired 2 more women developers, built a team culture that celebrated innovation, and turned our engineering department into something special. By month 16, we had 60 employees and were processing over $10 million in annual contracts. The growth was exponential, almost frightening. Investment firms were no longer just reaching out. They were competing for the opportunity to fund our expansion. Venture capitalists who wouldn't have returned my emails 2 years ago were now flying across the country to pitch me on why I should take their money. I was careful about who I partnered with. I interviewed them as thoroughly as they interviewed me, asked about their values, their vision, their track record with founders. I chose a firm that had helped build 3 successful companies without forcing out the original leadership. They understood that Binnacle Solutions wasn't just about profit. It was about changing narration and proving something bigger. 18 months after I walked out of Nanotech Industries with my cardboard box, Binnacle Solutions was valued at $200 million. We had offices in 3 cities, over 100 employees, and a client list that read like a who's who of American industry. Tech magazines were calling me a disruptive innovator. Business schools wanted me to speak to their students. The same venture capitalists who had ignored me when I was nobody were now praising my vision as if they had believed in me all along. But success, I learned, has a way of revealing truths. And the truth about Nanotech Industries was becoming increasingly clear to everyone in the industry. While Binnacle Solutions was rising, Nanotech was crumbling. Their outdated systems couldn't compete with our AI platform. Their toxic culture was driving away talent faster than they could hire replacements. Quarterly reports showed declining revenue, missed projections, and a board of directors losing patience with leadership. I heard the rumors through former colleagues who still had friends inside. Richard Caldwell was panicking, making desperate moves, slashing budgets, laying off employees to cut costs. The company that had seemed so powerful and untouchable when I worked there was revealing itself to be a house of cards built on outdated technology and poor leadership. They were hemorrhaging clients to us, watching their market share evaporate, struggling to understand how they had lost their dominance so completely. Part of me felt vindicated. The man who had dismissed my ideas, who had made me feel small, who had given me 3 years of maybe next year, was now watching his empire crumble. But surprisingly, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. Sadness for the talented people still trapped there. Sadness for the wasted potential. Sadness for what Nanotech could have been if they had valued people over ego. One afternoon in October, my CFO knocked on my office door with an unusual expression on his face. His name was Leon Hastings, a 50-year-old veteran of the tech industry who had joined us 6 months earlier after retiring from a successful career. He was steady, wise, and had a knack for seeing opportunities others missed. "Marcus," he said, sitting down across from my desk, "I need to show you something. It's about Nanotech Industries." He handed me a printed report. Market analysis, financial statements, insider projections. Nanotech was in worse shape than I had realized. They were on track to lose another 40% of their client base within the next quarter. Their stock price had dropped 62% in 18 months. The board was losing confidence in Richard Caldwell's leadership. And according to Leon's analysis, they were headed toward either bankruptcy or a forced sale within the next 6 months. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because," Leon said carefully, "there's an opportunity here. Nanotech is going to be sold. It's not a matter of if, but when. And when that happens, someone is going to acquire them for a fraction of what they're actually worth. That someone could be us." I stared at the report for a long time, my mind racing through possibilities. Buy Nanotech. Acquire the company that had undervalued me, that had dismissed my ideas, that had made me feel invisible for 7 years. The idea was almost absurd. Except it wasn't. Because Nanotech, despite its failures in leadership, still had something valuable. Talented people trapped under bad management, existing client relationships that could be salvaged, infrastructure that could be repurposed. "How much?" I asked. "Based on their current trajectory and market conditions, probably 60 to 70 million. Maybe less if they get desperate enough." We had grown fast, but we weren't that big. 60 million was more than we could do alone. But with our investors, with strategic financing, with the right approach, it was possible. More than possible. It was achievable. "Set up a meeting with our investors," I said. "I want to explore this." The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of financial analysis, strategic planning, and careful positioning. Our investors were intrigued by the idea. Acquiring Nanotech would eliminate our biggest competitor, give us access to their client base, and dramatically accelerate our growth. But it was risky. We would be taking on their debt, their reputation problems, their internal dysfunction. It wasn't just a business decision. It was a statement about what kind of company we wanted to be. I spent long nights thinking about my father, about the lessons he had taught me, about the kind of leader I wanted to become. Acquiring Nanotech out of revenge would be hollow. Destroying Richard Caldwell's career would be satisfying for maybe a moment, then empty. But acquiring Nanotech to save the talented people trapped there, to implement the innovations they had rejected, to prove that good leadership could transform any organization, that felt right. That felt like something my father would understand. In December, exactly 20 months after I had walked out of Nanotech with my cardboard box, Leon received a call. Nanotech Industries was officially being put up for sale. The board had finally lost confidence in Richard Caldwell's leadership. They were looking for buyers, and they were looking fast. The asking price was 75 million, but Leon believed we could negotiate down to 60 if we moved quickly and presented a solid offer. I assembled my core team in our conference room. Sienna, Leon, our head of operations, our chief technology officer, and our lead investor. We reviewed the numbers, discussed the risks, weighed the opportunities. Everyone had concerns, but everyone also saw the potential. This wasn't just an acquisition. It was a chance to prove that our way of doing business, our culture of respect and innovation, could transform even a failing company. "I need to be honest with everyone," I said, looking around the table at the people who had believed in me, who had built Binnacle Solutions alongside me. "Part of this is personal. Nanotech is where I learned what kind of leader I never wanted to be. But if we do this, it can't be about revenge or proving a point. It has to be about building something better. About showing that good leadership matters. about giving talented people the chance they deserve. Sienna spoke up first. I worked there. I know what it's like. If we can change that culture, if we can make it a place where people's ideas actually matter, then this is worth doing. The others nodded in agreement. Our lead investor, a woman named Francesca Kim, who had built and sold 2 successful companies, smiled. This is why we invested in you, Marcus. Not just because you're brilliant, but because you understand that business is about people. If you want to do this, we'll back you. We crafted our offer carefully. $62 million, contingent on due diligence and board approval. We would retain key employees, honor existing contracts, and invest an additional $10 million in updating their technology infrastructure. We presented ourselves not as hostile acquirers, but as partners who could restore Nanotech to relevance. The board responded within 48 hours. They wanted to meet. The meeting with Nanotech's board of directors was scheduled for a cold January morning in their downtown headquarters. I hadn't been inside that building in nearly 2 years, and walking through those familiar glass doors felt surreal. The same marble floors, the same reception desk, the same corporate art on the walls that tried too hard to look innovative. But everything felt smaller now, less intimidating. I wasn't the overlooked employee anymore. I was the potential buyer. Leon walked beside me, carrying a leather briefcase with our presentation materials. Francesca Kim followed, her designer heels clicking against the marble with confident precision. We were escorted to the top floor, to a boardroom I had never been allowed to enter when I worked here. The irony wasn't lost on me. 8 board members sat around a massive oak table. Their faces were tired, stressed, the kind of exhaustion that comes from watching something you've invested in slowly fall apart. They knew they were selling at a loss. They knew this was a rescue operation more than a business triumph. But they were professional, cordial, humbled enough to listen. I presented our vision for Nanotech's future. Not destruction, but transformation. We would integrate their existing clients with our superior technology, retrain their workforce on modern systems, rebuild their reputation through demonstrated results. We would keep the Nanotech name initially to maintain client relationships, but gradually align everything with Binnacle Solutions' culture and values. We showed financial projections, case studies from our own growth, testimonials from clients who had switched from Nanotech to us and seen immediate improvements. One board member, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Bennett, I'm going to be direct. You used to work here. You left under circumstances that weren't entirely positive. Some might say you have an axe to grind. How do we know this isn't about revenge? I met his eyes without hesitation. Because revenge would be letting Nanotech fail completely and picking up the pieces for pennies. I'm offering you $62 million and a plan to save the jobs of 200 employees who had nothing to do with bad management decisions. If this was about revenge, I'd be making a much different offer. The room was silent for a moment. Then the silver-haired man smiled slightly. Fair enough. They asked more questions, probed our financials, challenged our projections. We answered everything with data, with honesty, with confidence that came from knowing our platform actually worked. After 2 hours, they asked us to wait outside while they deliberated. Leon, Francesca, and I sat in an uncomfortable waiting area, drinking terrible coffee from a machine that probably hadn't been serviced in months. How do you think it went? Leon asked. They're going to accept, Francesca said confidently. They don't have better options, and they know it. The question is whether they'll negotiate on price. 45 minutes later, we were called back in. The silver-haired man, who I learned was the board chairman, stood up. Mr. Bennett, we'd like to accept your offer with one modification. $65 million, and you agree to retain all current employees for at least 6 months while you assess and restructure. We don't want this to be a mass layoff situation. I glanced at Leon, who gave me a subtle nod. We had budgeted for exactly that. Agreed, I said. But I want one additional condition. Richard Caldwell transitions out within 30 days. The employees deserve new leadership immediately. The chairman smiled. That won't be a problem. Mr. Caldwell has already been informed his tenure is ending. Whether he stays on in some capacity is entirely your decision as the new owner. We shook hands. Legal teams would handle the details, but the deal was essentially done. Binnacle Solutions was acquiring Nanotech Industries. The company that had told me, maybe next year, was now mine. The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, financial transfers, and strategic planning. We kept the acquisition quiet until all documents were signed, all regulatory approvals obtained, all contingencies satisfied. When the news finally broke, the tech industry reacted with shock. Headlines screamed about the underdog acquisition and the ultimate reversal of fortune. Business news channels wanted interviews. Industry analysts debated whether we had overpaid or found a bargain. But I wasn't interested in media attention. I was focused on the transition. We scheduled an all-hands meeting at Nanotech for the Friday after the acquisition was finalized. Every employee was required to attend. No one knew yet who had bought the company, only that there was new ownership and major changes were coming. I arrived early that Friday morning with Sienna and Leon. We stood in the back of the large conference hall, watching employees file in. I saw faces I recognized, people I had worked alongside, people who had watched me be dismissed and belittled. Some looked anxious. Others looked resigned. Everyone looked uncertain about their future. Richard Caldwell was there too, sitting in the front row, his jaw tight, his expression carefully neutral. He knew his time was ending, but he clearly didn't know the full story yet. The board chairman had kept my identity confidential until this moment. At exactly 9 o'clock, the board chairman walked to the podium. The room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, Nanotech Industries has been acquired. I want to introduce you to your new owner, the CEO of Binnacle Solutions." He paused for dramatic effect. "Please welcome Marcus Bennett." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some people gasped. Others sat in stunned silence. A few started whispering to neighbors. But the most interesting reaction was Richard Caldwell's. He turned in his seat, his face draining of color as he saw me walking down the aisle toward the stage. Our eyes met for one brief moment, and I saw everything there. Shock, humiliation, anger, disbelief. I took the podium and looked out at 200 faces staring back at me. Some were people I knew. Many were strangers. All of them were waiting to hear what would happen to their jobs, their futures, their livelihoods. "Good morning," I began, keeping my voice calm and steady. "For those who don't know me, I worked here for 7 years as a product manager. I left almost 2 years ago to start my own company. That company is now successful enough to acquire this one. But I'm not here to gloat or seek revenge. I'm here because I believe in the potential of the talented people in this room." I could see people beginning to relax slightly, their shoulders dropping, their expressions shifting from fear to cautious hope. Over the next 6 months, we're going to transform this company. We're going to implement new technology, new systems, new ways of working. Some processes will change dramatically. Some roles will evolve. But here's what won't change. If you're good at what you do, if you're willing to learn and grow, if you contribute meaningfully to our mission, you have a future here. This isn't a liquidation. This is a transformation. I outlined our plans in detail. Integration of Pinnacle's AI platform with Nanotech's existing infrastructure. Training programs for all employees. A new organizational structure that valued merit over tenure. An open-door policy where ideas were welcomed regardless of who proposed them. A culture built on respect, innovation, and results. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs," I continued. "That's natural. But I'm making you a promise right now. No one will be fired during the transition period unless they choose to leave or demonstrate behavior that's harmful to the team. We're betting on you. Now I'm asking you to bet on us." The room erupted in applause. Not everyone, Richard Caldwell certainly wasn't clapping, but enough people that I knew the message had landed. These employees had been living in uncertainty for months, watching their company crumble, fearing layoffs and bankruptcy. We were offering them stability, hope, and a chance to be part of something successful. After the meeting, people approached me with questions, concerns, and surprisingly, gratitude. Several employees who I had worked with years ago shook my hand, told me they were glad I was back, admitted they had always thought I deserved better treatment. It was validating, but also bittersweet. These same people had watched me be dismissed and hadn't said anything then. But I understood. Speaking up cost something, and not everyone can afford that cost. The real work began the following Monday. Sienna led the technology integration team, working with Nanotech's engineers to migrate systems to our platform. Leon oversaw the financial restructuring, consolidating departments, eliminating redundancies, optimizing resources. I spent my time meeting with every department head, understanding their challenges, identifying talent that had been overlooked or underutilized. One person I met with was a mid-level analyst named Trevor Huang. He had been at Nanotech for 5 years, consistently produced excellent work, but had never been promoted beyond his entry-level position. When I asked him why, he shrugged. I suggested some improvements to our data analysis processes about 3 years ago, Trevor explained. Richard Caldwell told me to focus on my assigned tasks and not try to reinvent the wheel. So I did. I stopped suggesting things. I just did my job and went home. I reviewed Trevor's file. His performance reviews were exemplary. His analyses were thorough and insightful. He had a master's degree in data science from a top university. There was absolutely no reason he should still be in an entry-level position except that his ideas had been dismissed and he had been made to feel invisible. How would you feel about leading our new data analytics division? I asked him. Trevor's eyes widened. Leading? I've never managed anyone. Neither had I before I started Binnacle Solutions. But you know the work, you have the vision, and you clearly have ideas that were never given a chance. I'm giving you that chance now. Build me a team. Show me what you can do. Within 2 weeks, Trevor had assembled a 4-person analytics team and created a proposal for predictive modeling that would save clients millions in operational costs. The ideas he had been told to suppress for 3 years became the foundation for one of our most valuable service offerings. I found similar stories throughout the company. A marketing coordinator who had brilliant campaign ideas that were never implemented. A junior developer who had coded solutions to problems management didn't know existed. An operations manager who had identified efficiency improvements that were dismissed as too complicated. Nanotech had been sitting on a goldmine of talent and treating it like dirt. But there was one conversation I was avoiding. One person I hadn't met with yet. Richard Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave during the transition, paid but essentially sidelined, waiting to hear his fate. According to the acquisition agreement, I had 30 days to decide whether to terminate his employment or offer him a different role. That deadline was approaching. My executive team had strong opinions. Sienna thought he should be fired immediately. He's toxic, Marcus. Everything we're trying to build here, he represents the opposite. Why would we keep him? Leon, surprisingly, disagreed. Because how we handle him sends a message to everyone else. If we fire him vindicatively, it looks like revenge. If we handle him professionally, it shows we're better than the culture he created. Francesca, our investor, had the most interesting perspective. What would your father do? She asked. I thought about that for a long time. My father, who had been dismissed and overlooked for 20 years, who had never become bitter, who had taught me to build something undeniable. What would he do? I called Richard Caldwell's office 3 weeks after the acquisition. Asked him to meet me in what used to be his executive suite, now temporarily my office during the transition. He arrived exactly on time, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes betraying his anxiety. Richard, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Thank you for coming. He sat down stiffly. I assume you're here to fire me. Actually, I'm here to offer you a choice. Richard Caldwell looked at me with suspicion, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The confident, dismissive executive who had told me maybe next year was gone. In his place sat a man who knew his career was in my hands, and the discomfort of that reversal was written across every line of his face. A choice, he repeated. Yes. You can leave Nanotech today with a generous severance package. 6 months' salary, continuation of benefits for a year, and a neutral reference letter. No one will know the details of your departure except that you chose to pursue other opportunities during the transition. Your reputation stays intact. He nodded slowly, waiting for the alternative. Or, I continued, you can stay on as a junior consultant for 1 year at half your previous salary. You'll report directly to me. You'll work on special projects. You'll learn what this company could have been if you had valued people over ego. At the end of that year, if you've proven you can adapt and grow, we'll discuss a permanent role at an appropriate level." Richard's face flushed. "A junior consultant? That's humiliating." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "Or is it an opportunity to understand what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, and told you're not ready? You spent 7 years telling me, maybe next year. I'm offering you an actual path forward if you're willing to take it." He sat in silence for a long moment, wrestling with his pride. I could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. The easy path was the severance, walking away with his dignity theoretically intact. But the harder path, the path that required actual humility and growth, that was something else entirely. "What would I be doing?" he finally asked. "Employee relations analysis. You'll interview staff at all levels, document their concerns and suggestions, report on cultural issues. You'll see firsthand what your leadership style created and help us fix it. You'll attend training on modern management techniques. You'll shadow different departments to understand what good leadership actually looks like. And if I refuse, then you take the severance and leave today. No judgment, no hard feelings. But you'll never know if you were capable of being better than you were." Richard stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the city below. The same view he'd had from his executive office when he told me I wasn't ready for leadership. I wondered if he was thinking about that conversation, if he recognized the poetry of this moment. "I need time to think about it," he said without turning around. "You have until Monday. Let HR know your decision." He left without another word. I watched him walk out, his shoulders slightly slumped, his confident stride diminished. Part of me felt satisfaction at his discomfort, but a larger part felt something closer to hope. Hope that people could actually change if given the right motivation and opportunity. That weekend, I visited my mother. My father had passed away 3 years earlier from a heart attack, sudden and shocking, taking from me the person whose opinion mattered most. But my mother still lived in the same small house where I grew up, surrounded by photos and memories. "Mom," I said, sitting at her kitchen table with tea she had made the way my father used to like it, "I need advice." I told her about the acquisition, about Richard Caldwell, about the choice I had offered him. She listened quietly, her weathered hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes thoughtful. "Your father once told me," she said slowly, "that the mark of a good person isn't how they treat people who can help them. It's how they treat people who can't. But he also said that the mark of a great leader is giving people the chance to be better than they are, even when they don't deserve it." "What if he doesn't take it?" I asked. "What if he chooses the easy way out? Then you'll know you offered him something he wasn't ready for. But you'll also know you tried. And that matters, Marcus. That matters more than revenge ever could." Monday morning arrived with gray skies and freezing rain. I was in the office early, reviewing integration reports from the weekend, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Caldwell is here to see you." Richard walked in looking different somehow. Less polished. He was wearing a suit but not his usual designer brand, and there was something in his posture that suggested he had spent the weekend doing the kind of soul-searching most people avoid. "I'm staying," he said without preamble. "I'll take the consultant position." I gestured for him to sit. "Can I ask why?" He took a deep breath. "Because my daughter is 17 years old, and she's brilliant. Really brilliant. And last week, when the news broke about you buying this company, she said something that I can't stop thinking about. She said, 'Dad, were you Marcus's Richard Caldwell?' I didn't understand what she meant at first. Then she explained. She asked if I was the person who made someone feel small, who dismissed their potential, who made them prove themselves somewhere else because I couldn't see their value." Richard's voice cracked slightly. I told her no, but I was lying. And she knew I was lying. I saw the disappointment in her eyes. My own daughter was disappointed in who I am as a person. So I'm staying because I need to be able to look her in the eye and tell her I tried to be better. Even if I fail, at least I tried. I studied him for a moment, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But what I saw was something more authentic, genuine discomfort with who he had been and uncertain hope about who he might become. "Okay," I said. "Here's how this works. You start tomorrow. You'll have a desk in the open office area, not an executive suite. You'll attend our team meetings. You'll interview employees about their experiences and concerns. You'll write weekly reports on what you learn. And Richard, if at any point you treat anyone the way you treated me, this opportunity ends immediately." "Understood," he said quietly. "There's one more thing. Tomorrow morning, you're going to attend our all-staff meeting. And you're going to apologize. Not to me specifically, but to everyone who worked under your leadership and felt dismissed or undervalued. You're going to own what you did and commit to doing better." I watched the resistance flash across his face, the instinct to defend himself, to minimize, to make excuses. But then he nodded. "I'll do it." After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, thinking about grace and second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the kind of leader my father had hoped I would become. I wasn't sure if Richard Caldwell would actually change. People rarely do, especially after decades of reinforced bad habits. But I had given him the opportunity, and what he did with it was now his responsibility, not mine. The next morning, our all-staff meeting was packed. Word had spread that something significant was happening. Employees filled the conference hall, curious and speculative. I saw Sienna and Trevor and Leon in the front rows, their expression supportive but watchful. Richard Caldwell stood at the podium, visibly uncomfortable, his hands gripping the edges as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Good morning," he began, his voice less commanding than I remembered. "Many of you know me. Some of you worked directly under me. And I'm here today because I owe you an apology." The room went completely silent. People leaned forward, not quite believing what they were hearing. "I was a bad leader," Richard continued. "I took credit for other people's work. I dismissed ideas without really listening. I made talented people feel invisible and unimportant. I created a culture where fear mattered more than innovation. And I'm genuinely sorry for that." He paused, gathering himself. "I can't undo the past, but I can commit to doing better going forward. I'm staying on here as a consultant, which means I'll be working alongside many of you. I'll be learning what good leadership actually looks like. And I hope that over time, I can earn back some of the respect I squandered." The applause that followed was polite but cautious. No one was ready to forgive completely, and Richard hadn't earned that yet. But it was a start. A genuine acknowledgement of failure and a commitment to growth. After the meeting, I found myself standing next to Sienna in the hallway. She looked at me with something between admiration and concern. That was either the most brilliant leadership move I've ever seen, or you're setting yourself up for disappointment. "Maybe both," I admitted. "But my father used to say that the world changes one person at a time. If Richard Caldwell can actually become a better leader, that's one less toxic executive in the world. And if he can't, at least we gave him the chance." "You're a better person than I am," Sienna said. "I would have fired him on day one." "Maybe," I replied. "But you would have done it fairly and professionally, which is more than he deserved. We're building something different here, Sienna. A place where people get second chances, where growth is valued, where mistakes don't have to be career-ending. If we can't extend that to Richard Caldwell, even after everything he did, then we're not really living our values." She nodded slowly. "Okay. But I'm watching him. And if he slips back into old patterns, then we deal with it," I promised. "But until then, we give him the chance to prove he's capable of change." The transformation of Nanotech Industries happened faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months of the acquisition, we had integrated 70% of their systems with Pinnacle's AI platform. Client retention rates, which had been plummeting under the old management, stabilized and then began climbing. Employees who had been demoralized and disconnected started showing up differently. Engaged, enthusiastic, contributing ideas in meetings. Trevor Huang's analytics division became one of our most profitable departments. His predictive modeling system helped a manufacturing client avoid a supply chain disaster that would have cost them $15 million. That success story spread through industry networks, bringing in new clients who wanted the same level of insight and protection. Sienna's engineering team developed 3 major platform upgrades that made our AI even more powerful and user-friendly. She had created a culture within her department where junior developers felt comfortable proposing radical ideas, where experimentation was encouraged, where failure was treated as a learning opportunity rather than a career liability. But the most surprising development was Richard Caldwell. He had spent the past 3 months doing exactly what I asked: interviewing employees, documenting concerns, attending training sessions, shadowing different departments. His weekly reports were thorough, honest, and increasingly self-aware. He wrote about discovering systemic problems he had created, about understanding how his leadership style had crushed innovation, about seeing the company through the eyes of people he had dismissed. One report in particular stood out. Richard had interviewed a custodial worker named Felix Moreno, a man who had worked at Nanotech for 12 years and whom Richard admitted he had never spoken to before. Felix had shared ideas about improving workplace efficiency, small observations about patterns he noticed while cleaning offices late at night. Simple things like which conference rooms were always booked but rarely used, which equipment seemed to break down repeatedly, which departments had supply waste. Richard implemented Felix's suggestions as a pilot program, and the results were remarkable. Conference room utilization improved by 30%. Equipment maintenance costs dropped by 22%. Supply waste decreased significantly. And Felix, who had been invisible for over a decade, suddenly had management listening to him. "I walked past Felix every day for years," Richard wrote in his report. "Never knew his name. Never asked if he had ideas. Never considered that someone in his position might see things I couldn't. I was so focused on titles and hierarchy that I missed the wisdom right in front of me. This is what I did to Marcus. This is what I did to dozens of talented people. I'm starting to understand the cost of my arrogance." I called Richard into my office after reading that report. He sat down, his expression cautious but more open than it had been months ago. The defensive armor he used to wear had cracked, revealing someone who was genuinely trying to change. "This report on Felix Moreno," I said. "It's good work." "Thank you. Felix is remarkable. I can't believe I never noticed. Here's what I want you to do next. I want you to create a program called Voices from Every Level. Interview employees from all departments and positions, from executives to entry-level workers to support staff. Document their ideas, their concerns, their observations. Find the Felix Morenos throughout this entire organization. Can you do that?" Richard nodded. "Yes." "But Marcus, I need to say something. When you offered me this position, I thought you were humiliating me. I thought it was your way of rubbing my face in what I'd done. But you were actually giving me something far more valuable. You were forcing me to see what I'd been blind to. I don't know if I can ever fully make up for the damage I caused, but I'm grateful for the chance to try." It was the most genuine thing I'd ever heard him say. Just keep doing the work, Richard. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen if you commit to it. After he left, I sat thinking about my father's lesson. Build something so undeniable that all closed doors become irrelevant. I had built that. Binnacle Solutions was thriving, Nanotech was being transformed, and people who had been overlooked were finally getting opportunities. But there was something else my father used to say, something I had been thinking about more and more lately. Success isn't about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you make possible for others. 4 months after the acquisition, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "From a former Nanotech employee you probably don't remember." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. "Dear Marcus, my name is Yolanda Price. I worked at Nanotech for 3 years as an administrative assistant before leaving 2 years ago because the environment was so toxic I couldn't take it anymore. I'm writing because I heard about what you've done with the company, and I wanted to thank you. Not for me, but for my sister, Carmen. She still works there in the HR department. She called me last week crying, but not sad tears. Happy tears. She said for the first time in 5 years, she actually enjoys going to work. She said people are kind to each other now. She said her ideas are being heard. You gave my sister her dignity back. Thank you for that." I read the email 3 times, feeling something warm and complicated in my chest. This was why we had done it. Not for revenge, not for market dominance, not even for profit, though that mattered too. We had done it to prove that workplaces could be different, that leadership could be compassionate without being weak, that success and human dignity weren't mutually exclusive. I forwarded the email to my executive team with a simple note: "This is what we're building." That same week, we held our quarterly all-hands meeting. 600 employees now, split between our original Binnacle Solutions locations and the integrated Nanotech offices. We connected via video conference, every face visible on screens, every voice able to contribute. I stood in our main conference room, looking at the sea of faces, both physical and digital, and felt profound gratitude. For months ago, we took a risk. We acquired a struggling company not because it made financial sense on paper, but because we believed in the people trapped inside a failing system. Today, I want to share some numbers with you. I pulled up the quarterly report on the screens. Revenue is up 42% from last quarter. Client retention is at 94%, the highest in company history. Employee satisfaction scores have increased by 68%. We've launched 4 new service offerings, all developed by former Nanotech employees whose ideas were previously ignored. And we've been approached by 3 other struggling tech companies asking if we'd be interested in similar acquisitions. The room erupted in applause. But I raised my hand for quiet. These numbers matter, but they're not the most important thing. The most important thing is the email I received this week from Yolanda Price, thanking us for giving her sister Carmen her dignity back. That's what we're really building here. Not just a successful company, but a place where everyone matters, where ideas are valued regardless of who proposes them, where kindness and competence aren't opposites. After the meeting, Carmen Price approached me, her eyes red but smiling. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Yolanda's sister. I wanted to thank you in person." "You don't need to thank me, Carmen. You've been here doing good work for 5 years. We just created an environment where that work could finally be recognized." "It's more than that," she said. "My daughter is 14. She came to work with me last week during school break. She got to see me in this environment, see me contributing in meetings, see people respecting what I have to say. She told me she wants to be like me when she grows up. No child ever said that about me when I worked under the old management. You gave me that. You gave my daughter a role model. That matters more than you know." I thought about my own father, about watching him come home exhausted and overlooked, about wanting to be nothing like the people who dismissed him. Now I was creating a world where children could look at their parents and feel pride. That felt like legacy. 6 months into the integration, something unexpected happened. Richard Caldwell's Voices from Every Level program had documented over 300 employee interviews and generated dozens of actionable insights. But one interview revealed something that would change everything. Richard had spoken with a senior engineer named Paulo Gutierrez who had been at Nanotech for 9 years. Paulo mentioned, almost as an aside, that he had developed a prototype for a quantum computing algorithm 5 years ago. He had presented it to management, including Richard, who had dismissed it as too theoretical, not practical for current markets. Paulo had put the prototype in a drawer and forgotten about it. Richard, to his credit, immediately brought this to my attention. "Marcus, I need to show you something. I think I may have made an even bigger mistake than dismissing your AI platform." We pulled Paulo's old prototype from the archives. It was brilliant, genuinely revolutionary. If developed properly, it could leapfrog current quantum computing limitations and position us years ahead of competitors. I assembled our top engineers, including Sienna, to review it. "This is extraordinary," Sienna said after 3 hours of analysis. "Paulo, why didn't you push harder for this?" Paulo shrugged, his expression resigned. When your ideas get dismissed enough times, you stop proposing them. You just do your job and collect your paycheck. It was exactly what Trevor had said months ago. Exactly what dozens of employees had experienced. Talent suppressed, innovation buried, potential wasted because leadership couldn't see beyond their own limited vision. "Paulo," I said, "I want you to lead a new division focused on developing this technology. Build a team, get whatever resources you need, and show us what this can become." No one is dismissing this idea now. His eyes widened. "Lead a division? I've never." "Neither had most of the people now running departments here. But you have the vision, the technical expertise, and the passion. That's what matters. Will you do it?" He nodded, stunned. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Over the next 2 months, Paulo assembled a 12-person team and accelerated development of the quantum algorithm. The potential applications were staggering: financial modeling, drug discovery, climate prediction, cryptography. We filed for patents, began conversations with potential partners, and started positioning ourselves at the cutting edge of quantum computing. But what struck me most was watching Paulo transform. The resigned, defeated engineer who had given up on his ideas became energized, confident, visionary. He presented at conferences, published papers, attracted attention from researchers at major universities. His work started generating licensing interest worth millions. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Paulo said to me one afternoon in his lab. "The idea hasn't changed that much from 5 years ago. The core algorithm is essentially the same. What changed was having someone believe it was worth pursuing. That's all it took. Someone believing." I thought about my own journey, about the AI platform that Richard had called unmarketable nonsense, about how close I had come to abandoning it when the rejection felt overwhelming. Belief was powerful. Leadership that fostered belief, that saw potential where others saw problems, that was the difference between mediocrity and excellence. 8 months after the acquisition, I received a phone call that would test everything we had built. The CEO of Horizon Dynamics, one of our largest competitors, wanted to meet. His name was Vincent Cordero, and he had a reputation as a shrewd negotiator and aggressive businessman. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Vincent was in his mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with a kind of confidence that comes from decades of winning. We exchanged pleasantries, ordered coffee, and then he got to the point. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct. I want to acquire Binnacle Solutions. I'm prepared to offer you $400 million. You keep your leadership team, maintain operational autonomy, but you get the resources and infrastructure of a company 10 times your size." It was a staggering number. $400 million. Enough to make me wealthy beyond anything I had imagined when I was living in that small apartment coding until midnight. Enough to secure my mother's future, reward every employee who had believed in me, validate everything I had built. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully. "Can I ask why you're interested?" Vincent smiled. "Because you're disrupting the market. Your AI platform is better than ours, your quantum computing division is positioned to dominate, and your company culture is attracting the best talent. I can either compete with you for the next decade and maybe win, or I can acquire you and guarantee the win. I prefer guarantees. And what happens to our culture, our values, the way we treat employees? That's your department. I'm buying your success, not changing what makes you successful. You keep running things your way." It sounded perfect. Too perfect. I told Vincent I needed time to consider, and we agreed to talk again in 2 weeks. That night, I gathered my core leadership team: Sienna, Leon, Francesca, Trevor, and Paulo. I told them about the offer, about the number, about Vincent's promises. Their reactions varied. Leon, ever the financial analyst, saw the opportunity. $400 million is more than fair. It's actually generous. We could negotiate for more, but honestly, that number gives everyone here life-changing returns. Sienna was skeptical. Vincent Cordero has a reputation. He says he won't interfere, but he will. In 2 years, we'll be just another subsidiary that lost what made it special. Paulo agreed. I left a big company environment because it was suffocating. This feels like going back to that. Trevor was conflicted. The money would be transformative for everyone who helped build this. But would we still be building what we believe in? Francesca, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Marcus, what does your gut tell you?" I sat with that question for 3 days. What did my gut tell me? On paper, selling made perfect sense. $400 million would change lives, reward loyalty, provide security. Everyone who had taken a risk on Binnacle Solutions would be compensated beyond their wildest expectations. My mother would never have to worry about money again. I could fund scholarships for children like my younger self, create opportunities for overlooked talent, make a difference in ways that pure profit never could. But there was something else, something harder to quantify. We had built something rare. A company where people mattered, where innovation came from every level, where former janitors could propose ideas that saved millions, where dismissed engineers could lead quantum computing divisions, where even toxic executives could be given second chances to become better leaders. I thought about Yolanda Price's email, about her sister Carmen finally having dignity at work, about a 14-year-old girl wanting to be like her mother. I thought about Trevor and Paolo and Sienna and all the others who had been invisible until someone created space for them to shine. I thought about Richard Caldwell, who was genuinely trying to unlearn decades of bad leadership because someone believed he could change. What we had built wasn't just valuable because it was profitable. It was valuable because it was replicable. Because we were proving that a different kind of capitalism was possible, one that didn't require sacrificing human dignity for shareholder returns. On the fourth day, I called Vincent Cordero. Vincent, I appreciate your offer. Truly. But I'm going to decline. There was silence on the other end. Then, Marcus, did you not understand the number? $400 million. You'll never get another offer like this. I understand the number perfectly. But what you're buying isn't just technology and client contracts. You're buying proof that business can be done differently. And if I sell that to someone who might slowly compromise it, then I'm betraying everything we built. I can't do that. You're making a mistake, Vincent said, his tone hardening. You're passing up generational wealth because of some idealistic notion about company culture. Do you know how naive that sounds? Maybe it is naive, I admitted. But my father was a janitor who was overlooked for 20 years because people couldn't see past his job title to his intelligence. I built this company to prove that everyone has value if someone creates space for them to show it. That's not for sale. Not for 400 million. Not for any amount. Vincent hung up without another word. I sat in my office staring at the phone, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life or the most important decision. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with my leadership team. They gathered in the conference room, their faces anxious, wondering if I had accepted the offer. I turned him down, I said without preamble. Sienna smiled. Good. Leon looked concerned. Marcus, are you sure? That was... I know what it was, I interrupted gently. But here's what I realized. We can always make money. There will always be opportunities for profit. But what we've built here, this culture, this proof that businesses can value people and profit simultaneously, that's rare. If we sell it to someone who might compromise it, we're not just giving up a company. We're giving up a model that other companies could learn from. I pulled up a presentation on the screen. Instead of selling, I want to do something different. I want to create the Pinnacle Foundation, funded by 10% of our annual profits. Its mission, to help overlooked talent at other companies start their own businesses. We'll provide seed funding, mentorship, resources, and connections. We'll be a launching pad for the next generation of people who are being told, maybe next year. Trevor leaned forward. You want to replicate what you did, but help others do it? Exactly. We can make more impact by staying independent and helping others than we ever could by selling to Horizon Dynamics. And honestly, I think we're just getting started. Paolo's quantum division is going to be huge. Sienna's engineering innovations are positioning us to dominate AI for the next decade. Trevor's analytics are saving clients millions. We're not at our peak. We're at the beginning. Francesca, who had invested in us when we were nothing, smiled with something like pride. Your father would be proud of you, Marcus. You're thinking about legacy, not just liquidity. My father taught me that success isn't about what you achieve for yourself, I said. It's about what you make possible for others. Selling to Vincent would have made me wealthy. Staying independent and building the foundation makes it possible for hundreds of other overlooked people to build their own futures. That feels like real success. The vote was unanimous. We would remain independent. We would grow on our own terms. And we would use our success to help others do the same. The next morning, I sent an email to all 600 employees explaining the decision, the offer we had declined, and the foundation we were creating. The response was overwhelming. People who I had never met personally wrote to say they were proud to work for a company that chose values over valuation. Industry publications ran stories about the CEO who turned down $400 million to preserve company culture. Recruiting inquiries tripled. But the message that meant the most came from my mother. She called me that evening, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they're willing to take, but what they're willing to give up for something more important. You just proved you're exactly who he hoped you'd become." 10 months after the acquisition, the Pinnacle Foundation officially launched. We started with $5 million in seed funding and a simple mission: identify overlooked talent at companies across the country and help them build their own ventures. We created an application process, assembled a review board of successful entrepreneurs, and spread the word through industry networks. The response was staggering. Within the first month, we received over 800 applications. Stories of brilliant engineers ignored by management. Analysts with revolutionary ideas gathering dust in drawers. Developers told their innovations were too risky. It was like reading my own story repeated hundreds of times, each with different details but the same heartbreaking pattern. Talent dismissed, potential wasted, dreams deferred. We selected our first cohort of 10 founders. Each received $50,000 in seed funding, 3 months of intensive mentorship, access to our network of clients and investors, and office space in our facilities. But more valuable than any of that was the belief. We were telling them what no one else had. Your idea matters, your vision is worth pursuing, you are capable of building something extraordinary. One founder was a woman named Keisha Williams. She had spent 12 years as a logistics coordinator at a shipping company, consistently proposing improvements to route optimization that management dismissed as too complicated. She had eventually stopped proposing anything and just did her assigned tasks. When she applied to our foundation, her idea was fully developed: an AI-powered logistics platform that could reduce shipping times by 30% and fuel costs by 25%. Within 6 months of receiving our funding and support, Keisha had a working prototype and 3 pilot clients. Within a year, she had raised $3 million in venture capital and hired 15 employees. Her platform was being called revolutionary by industry analysts. And every time she was interviewed, she mentioned the Pinnacle Foundation as the organization that saw her potential when no one else would. Another founder was a young man named Dante Foster who had worked as a customer service representative at a software company. He had noticed patterns in customer complaints that suggested systematic problems with user interface design. He had documented these patterns, created mock-ups of better designs, and presented them to management. They told him to focus on answering phones, not designing products. 3 years later, with our foundation support, his UI design firm was working with major clients and generating over $1 million in annual revenue. Watching these founders succeed felt more satisfying than any business achievement of my own. This was the legacy my father had imagined, not just building something successful myself, but creating pathways for others to do the same. Meanwhile, Pinnacle Solutions continued growing at a pace that sometimes felt overwhelming. Our quantum computing division, under Paulo's leadership, had developed an algorithm that pharmaceutical companies were licensing for drug discovery research. Early results suggested it could reduce development timelines by up to 40%, potentially saving millions of lives by bringing treatments to market faster. Ciena's engineering team had expanded to 60 people and was consistently producing innovations that kept us ahead of competitors. Trevor's analytics division had become so valuable that clients were paying premium rates just to access his team's insights. We were profitable, growing, and maintaining the culture that had made us special in the first place. But success brought new challenges. With 600 employees across multiple locations, maintaining our values required constant attention. It was easy to value everyone when the company was small. It was harder when you had departments you rarely visited, employees you had never personally met, processes that could hide the kind of dismissive behavior we had worked so hard to eliminate. I was reviewing quarterly reports one afternoon when Ciena knocked on my office door, her expression troubled. "Marcus, we have a problem. Can I come in?" She sat down and pulled out her laptop. "I've been getting complaints about one of our managers in the Seattle office. His name is Craig Donovan. He's been here for 8 months, came from outside the company with impressive credentials. His team consistently hits their targets, his clients are happy, but his employees are miserable." She showed me anonymous feedback from his direct reports. Comments about him taking credit for their work, dismissing their suggestions, creating a competitive atmosphere where people hoarded information instead of collaborating. It was eerily familiar, like watching a younger version of Richard Caldwell emerge in our own organization. How did this happen? I asked. How did we hire someone and let this go on for 8 months without catching it? Because his results were good, Sienna admitted. And we've grown so fast that our usual feedback systems didn't catch it until now. But Marcus, if we don't address this immediately, we risk becoming exactly what we replaced at Nanotech. She was right. This was the test. It's easy to have values when everything is going well. The real test is whether you uphold those values when they're inconvenient, when they might cost you a high performer, when enforcing them requires difficult conversations. I flew to Seattle the next day. The office there was in a modern building with beautiful views of the Puget Sound. 85 employees, mostly engineers and project managers supporting clients in the Pacific Northwest. I announced an impromptu all-hands meeting for that afternoon. Craig Donovan was easy to spot. Mid-30s, confident to the point of arrogance, the kind of presence that commanded attention in a room. His team sat together, their body language subtly defensive, their eyes avoiding his. I started the meeting by talking about company values, about what Binnacle Solutions stood for, about how success without integrity was just polished failure. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I told them about Richard Caldwell. When we acquired Nanotech, I said, we found a company full of talented people working under toxic leadership. The CEO, my former boss, had created a culture where fear mattered more than innovation. He took credit for other people's work. He dismissed ideas without listening. He made brilliant people feel worthless. We almost fired him. But instead, we gave him a chance to change, to learn, to become the leader he should have been. I looked directly at Craig. It worked. Richard spent months interviewing employees, documenting his own failures, learning what real leadership looks like. Today, he runs our employee development program and is one of our most valuable contributors. He changed because someone believed he could and gave him the structure to do it. After the meeting, I called Craig into a private office. His confidence had diminished slightly, replaced by wariness. Craig, I'm going to be direct. You're talented, your clients are happy, your results are good. But your team is miserable. They feel dismissed, undervalued, and invisible. That's not acceptable here, regardless of your performance numbers. He started to defend himself, but I raised my hand. I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in whether you're capable of change. So here's your choice, and it's the same choice I gave Richard Caldwell. You can leave today with a severance package and a neutral reference. Or you can stay, accept intensive leadership coaching, commit to changing how you treat people, and prove you're capable of being better. But if you stay and don't change, you're gone. Which do you choose? Craig sat in silence for a long moment. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of pride against opportunity. Finally, he spoke. What would the coaching involve? You'd work directly with Richard Caldwell, actually. He'd shadow you, observe your interactions, provide feedback, teach you what he's learned about real leadership. You'd also meet weekly with a professional executive coach. And you'd need to apologize to your team, sincerely, and ask them to hold you accountable going forward. And if I don't improve, then we part ways. No second chances after this one. He nodded slowly. I'll stay. I'll do the coaching. Richard Caldwell flew to Seattle the following week to begin working with Craig. Watching my former boss, who had once been the problem, now helping solve similar problems in others was surreal. But Richard approached it with genuine commitment and surprising wisdom earned from his own transformation. He spent 2 weeks shadowing Craig, observing meetings, talking to team members, documenting patterns. His report was thorough and uncomfortably honest. Craig wasn't malicious, Richard concluded, but he was insecure. He took credit for others' work because he was afraid his own contributions weren't enough. He dismissed suggestions because he worried others might outshine him. He created competition because he thought it would make him look indispensable. Craig is who I was, Richard wrote in his assessment. Talented but terrified. Successful but hollow. He's built his identity on being the smartest person in the room, and he'll do anything to maintain that perception, even if it means crushing the people around him. But unlike me, he's young enough that these patterns aren't as deeply entrenched. He can change if he wants to. The coaching process was intensive and uncomfortable for Craig. Richard made him interview each of his team members, listen to their experiences without defending himself, document the impact of his behavior. Craig attended workshops on emotional intelligence, collaborative leadership, and creating psychologically safe teams. He read books Richard recommended, watched videos of effective leaders, studied the difference between authority and respect. 3 months into the process, something shifted. Craig held a team meeting where he apologized genuinely and specifically for behaviors his team had experienced. He acknowledged taking credit for Sarah Chen's innovative algorithm design. He admitted dismissing Marcus Wong's suggestion about process improvements without really listening. He owned creating an environment where people competed instead of collaborated. "I've been a bad manager," Craig said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I convinced myself that results were all that mattered, that how I achieved them didn't count. I was wrong. I'm working on being better, and I'm asking you to be patient with me while I learn. I'm also asking you to hold me accountable. If I slip back into old patterns, call me out. I can't change if no one tells me when I'm failing." The response from his team wasn't immediate forgiveness, but it was cautious hope. They had been burned before, not just by Craig but by previous managers at other companies. Trust, once broken, required time and consistent action to rebuild. Over the following months, Craig's transformation was gradual but real. He started crediting team members by name in client presentations. He asked for input before making decisions. He created space for others to shine instead of always positioning himself as the hero. His team's satisfaction scores improved dramatically. Their collaboration increased. Their innovation accelerated. Richard returned to headquarters and came to my office one evening. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Working with Craig was one of the most important things I've ever done. Seeing my own failures reflected in someone else, being able to help him avoid the mistakes I made, it gave me a sense of purpose I haven't felt in years. I think I've found my calling." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I want to do this full time. Work with leaders who are struggling, who are talented but toxic, who need what you gave me, a mirror, a structure, and a belief that they can be better. I want to formalize what we did with Craig, create a program that other companies can use. With your permission, I'd like to build a leadership development division focused specifically on rehabilitating toxic managers." It was a remarkable evolution. The man who had once been the problem now wanted to dedicate himself to solving that problem in others. "Richard, that's brilliant. Do it. Build the program. Make it something we can offer to other companies as a service. Transform what you learned into something that can help thousands of leaders become better." He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it was completely genuine. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Marcus. You could have fired me, and honestly, I deserved it. But you gave me something more valuable than revenge. You gave me a chance at redemption." 1 year after the acquisition, we held our annual company-wide gathering. All 750 employees, from every location, converged on a conference center for 3 days of celebration, planning, and connection. It was expensive and logistically complex, but absolutely essential. This was how we maintained culture at scale, how we kept everyone connected to our mission and values. The first evening featured a gala dinner where we recognized outstanding achievements from the past year. Trevor Huang received an award for his analytics division's impact on client success. Paulo Gutierrez was honored for breakthrough innovations in quantum computing. Sienna Morris was celebrated for building an engineering culture that had attracted top talent from companies across the industry. But the most emotional moment came when we recognized Felix Moreno, the custodial worker whose observations had sparked Richard's transformation. Felix was promoted to Facilities Operations Manager with a 40% salary increase and a team of 6 people. When he accepted the award, his hands were shaking. "I've worked in buildings for 32 years, Felix said quietly into the microphone. "In all that time, no one ever asked what I thought about anything. I was invisible. I cleaned offices while people talked about important things, and I might as well have been furniture. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Caldwell, this company you've built, it sees people. All people. Not just the ones with fancy titles. Thank you for that." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. I saw grown men and women crying, People who had their own stories of being invisible, of being overlooked, of being dismissed. Felix's recognition was their recognition. His elevation was proof that our values weren't just words on a wall. The second day featured breakout sessions where employees from different departments and locations collaborated on new initiatives. A customer service representative from Boston partnered with a senior engineer from our Seattle office to develop a client feedback system that would eventually become a new product offering. An accountant from Chicago worked with a sales director from Atlanta to create a financial transparency dashboard that would revolutionize how we tracked and communicated company performance. But the highlight was the unveiling of our foundation's first-year results. The 10 founders we had supported in our initial cohort had collectively raised over $15 million in additional funding, created 130 jobs, and generated $8 million in revenue. 3 of them were already profitable. All of them credited the Pinnacle Foundation with making their success possible. Keisha Williams, whose logistics platform was now being used by major shipping companies, spoke at the gala. A year ago, I was a logistics coordinator who had given up on my ideas. I had accepted that I would spend my career watching other people implement inferior solutions while my better ideas gathered dust. Then the Pinnacle Foundation gave me something I thought I'd lost: belief. Not just funding or mentorship, though those were invaluable. They gave me back the belief that my ideas mattered, that I was capable, that being overlooked for 12 years didn't mean I was actually unworthy. She paused, her voice catching. Today, my company employs 18 people. We're changing how the logistics industry operates. And every single person I hire, I make sure they know their ideas matter. I'm paying forward what this foundation gave me. That's the real legacy. Not just successful companies, but leaders who create space for others. The third day was reserved for strategic planning and vision casting. I stood on stage looking at 750 faces, people who had taken a chance on us, who had left secure jobs to join something uncertain, who had believed in the mission even when the path wasn't clear. 3 years ago, I began, I was sitting in a conference room being told, maybe next year, by a boss who couldn't see my value. I could have accepted that verdict. I could have believed that if they didn't see potential in me, maybe it didn't exist. But I had learned something from my father. Build something so undeniable that all closed doors become irrelevant. I continued, we built that. Pinnacle Solutions is proof that overlooked people can create extraordinary things if given the chance. But here's what I've learned in the past year. Our success isn't the end goal. It's the foundation for something bigger. We have a responsibility now. Not just to our shareholders or clients, but to every person still sitting in a conference room being told they're not ready, not enough, not valuable. I pulled up a new presentation on the screens. So today, I'm announcing 3 major initiatives. First, we're expanding the Pinnacle Foundation. Instead of 10 founders per year, we're committing to supporting 50. We're increasing our annual funding to $25 million. We're going to help hundreds of overlooked people build their own companies over the next decade. The room erupted in applause, but I held up my hand. Second, we're creating the Open Innovation Institute. Any employee at any company can submit their dismissed ideas to us. If we think they have merit, we'll develop them and share the resulting profits with the original innovator. No more brilliant ideas dying in drawers because management couldn't see their potential. The applause was even louder this time. I could see people nodding, recognizing the value of this, understanding how it would change the innovation landscape. And third, I said, waiting for quiet, we're launching a leadership transformation program. Richard Caldwell has developed a curriculum based on his own journey from toxic executive to effective leader. We're going to offer this program to companies struggling with bad management. Not to make money, we'll do it at cost, but to spread the model of leadership that values people over ego. I looked directly at Richard, who was sitting in the front row, his eyes glistening. Richard, will you come up here? He walked to the stage, moving slowly, clearly surprised. When he reached me, I turned to address the crowd. This man was my boss 3 years ago. He dismissed my ideas, took credit for my work, and made me feel worthless. When I acquired Nanotech, I could have fired him. Most people thought I should. But I gave him a choice: leave with dignity or stay and learn to be better. He stayed. And over the past year, he's become one of our most valuable leaders. He's helped Craig Donovan and 6 other struggling managers transform themselves. He's developed a program that could change how thousands of companies approach leadership development. I turned to Richard. I'm promoting you to Chief People Officer. Your job is to ensure that no one in this organization, or in any organization we touch, ever feels the way I felt when you told me, maybe next year. Your job is to make sure everyone is seen, valued, and given the opportunity to contribute their best. Can you do that? Richard's voice was thick with emotion.
Yes.
And Marcus, everyone here should know something. When you offered me that choice a year ago, I almost took the severance. My pride was telling me to walk away, to preserve my ego, to avoid the humiliation of admitting I had been wrong. But something you said stopped me. You said, "You'll never know if you were capable of being better than you were." That haunted me. The idea that I might go my whole life never knowing if I could have been more than my worst self. So I stayed, and I learned, and I changed. Not perfectly, I still mess up, but I'm better than I was. And if I can change, anyone can. The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. People who had worked under Richard's toxic leadership, who had suffered because of his arrogance, were now celebrating his transformation. It was forgiveness and recognition and hope all wrapped together. After the gathering ended and people returned to their respective locations, I found myself alone in my office late one evening. The building was quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of a custodial crew working. I thought about Felix, about how he had done this job invisibly for years before someone finally asked what he thought. There was a knock on my door. Felix himself stood there with his cleaning cart. "Mr. Bennett, sorry to disturb you. I can come back later." "Felix, come in. And please, call me Marcus." He wheeled his cart into my office and started emptying the trash, but I stopped him. "Felix, can I ask you something? When you were invisible for all those years, when people walked past you like you weren't there, how did you not become bitter?" He paused, considering the question. "My grandfather used to tell me something when I was young. He said, 'The world will try to tell you who you are based on what you do for a living. Don't believe it. Your worth isn't in your job title. It's in how you treat people, how you show up each day, how you maintain your dignity even when others don't see it.' So I never became bitter because I knew my worth wasn't determined by whether other people recognized it." "That's wisdom, Felix. Real wisdom." He smiled. "Maybe. But it's easier to maintain your dignity when someone finally sees you. What you've done here, Marcus, giving people like me a voice, it doesn't just change careers. It changes how we see ourselves. My son is 17. He used to be embarrassed when his friends asked what his dad did for a living. Now he tells them I'm a facilities operations manager at a tech company that values my input. Same work, different title, but the difference in his pride? That's everything." After Felix left, I sat thinking about legacy again. My father had worked as a janitor for 20 years, brilliant but overlooked, valued for his labor but not his mind. He had raised me to never accept being invisible, to build something that made my value undeniable. I had done that. But more importantly, I had created space for others to do the same. That felt like the real achievement. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Watching the news. They're talking about your leadership program. Your father would be so proud." "I'm proud. You didn't just become successful, sweetheart. You became good. There's a difference." I looked around my office, at the company we had built, at the culture we had created, at the lives we were changing. 3 years ago, I had walked out of Nanotech Industries with a cardboard box and a dream. Today, we were transforming an industry, helping hundreds of overlooked people build their own futures, and proving that business success and human dignity weren't mutually exclusive. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't destruction. It was building something so good, so undeniable, so transformative that you could afford to be generous even to those who had doubted you. It was taking the pain of being dismissed and turning it into purpose. It was proving that the people who were overlooked, underestimated, and told maybe next year weren't the problem. The system that couldn't see their value was the problem. And we were changing that system, one company at a time, one leader at a time, one overlooked person at a time. 18 months after the acquisition, I received a message that would bring everything full circle. It was from a lawyer representing an anonymous client who wanted to meet with me. The message was cryptic, professional, and oddly formal. All it said was that this person had been following my journey for years and had information that would be meaningful to me. Against my better judgment, and despite Leon's concerns about security, I agreed to the meeting. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant downtown on a Tuesday evening. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, still unsure what to expect. At exactly 7 o'clock, an elderly man walked in, probably in his mid-70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed familiar somehow. He moved slowly but with dignity, and when he saw me, he smiled like he was greeting an old friend. "Marcus Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting me. My name is Samuel Hayes." The name meant nothing to me initially, but something about his presence felt significant. We sat down, and he ordered tea with the careful deliberation of someone who had refined his preferences over decades. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked to meet you," Samuel began. "The truth is, I've been watching your career for a very long time. Since before you even started at Nanotech Industries." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I don't understand. How would you know about me before Nanotech?" Samuel smiled gently. "Because I knew your father. James Bennett and I worked together 40 years ago, when I was still actively running my company and he was a young man trying to break into the tech industry." The restaurant seemed to fade away. My father had never mentioned knowing anyone named Samuel Hayes. My father was a janitor for most of his career. "How did you work together?" "That's the story I need to tell you," Samuel said, leaning back in his chair. 40 years ago, I founded a small tech company called Apex Systems. Your father applied for an engineering position. He had a degree from a state university, brilliant mind, creative solutions, exactly the kind of person we needed. I hired him immediately. For 2 years, he was one of our best engineers. He developed 3 patents that became the foundation of our most successful products. I sat stunned, trying to reconcile this with everything I thought I knew about my father's life. But he was a janitor. He worked in maintenance for 20 years. "Let me finish," Samuel said quietly. "After 2 years, I had to step away from daily operations due to health issues. I left the company in the hands of a vice president named Harrison Cole. Harrison was brilliant with numbers but terrible with people. Within 6 months, he had created a toxic culture focused entirely on credentials and pedigree. Your father, who had come from a working-class background and a modest university, became a target." Samuel's voice grew heavy with regret. "Harrison systematically dismissed your father's contributions. He reassigned his projects to engineers from prestigious schools. He took credit for your father's innovations. He made James feel worthless, exactly the way Richard Caldwell made you feel worthless. Eventually, your father couldn't take it anymore. He resigned. And because Harrison had carefully documented false performance issues, your father couldn't get another engineering job. He ended up working as a janitor because no tech company would hire him after Harrison's fabricated record." Tears were streaming down my face. I had spent my entire childhood watching my father come home exhausted, believing he had never achieved his dreams, never knowing he had once been exactly what I became, an engineer with innovative ideas who was crushed by bad leadership. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "Because he was protecting you," Samuel said. "He didn't want you to carry his bitterness. He didn't want you to give up on the industry because it had failed him. So he framed his janitor job as a choice, as honest work, as something to be proud of. He taught you to see dignity in every position while secretly hoping you would achieve what he couldn't." Samuel continued, "I didn't learn what Harrison had done until years later, after I had recovered from my health issues and tried to reconnect with the company I had founded. By then, Apex Systems had been sold, Harrison had moved on, and your father had been working as a janitor for over a decade. I tried to find him, to apologize, to make things right, but he had moved and I lost track." He pulled out an old photograph and slid it across the table. It showed a younger version of my father standing next to a younger Samuel Hayes in what looked like a laboratory, both smiling, holding a prototype of some kind of circuit board. "I found him again 5 years ago," Samuel said. "Completely by accident. I was giving a guest lecture at a community college, and he was in the audience. He had been taking engineering courses at night, still learning, still curious after all those years. We talked for hours. He told me about you, about how proud he was of you, about how you were working at Nanotech and showing real promise. He made me promise not to contact you, not to interfere, not to tell you about his past. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits. He died 3 years ago, I said, my voice breaking. Heart attack. Sudden. I know, Samuel said gently. I was at the funeral. In the back row where you wouldn't notice me. I honored his wish not to reveal myself. But Marcus, there's something else you need to know. Before he died, your father told me about your AI platform idea, the one Richard Caldwell dismissed. He asked me to watch over you, to help if you ever needed it, but to do it invisibly so you would believe you succeeded on your own. The pieces started falling into place. The early clients who took a chance on my platform. The investors who seemed unusually interested in a startup with no track record. That was you. Samuel nodded. I made a few introductions. Suggested your name to people who trusted my judgment. But Marcus, I need you to understand something crucial. I didn't make you successful. Your platform was genuinely revolutionary. Your leadership was authentically good. Your vision was entirely your own. All I did was open a few doors that might have taken you slightly longer to open yourself. The walking through those doors, the building of this empire, the transformation of Nanotech, the foundation, the lives you've changed, that was all you. I sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. My entire journey, the story I had told myself about overcoming obstacles alone, about proving myself without help, had been influenced by this man I didn't even know existed. A man who had been watching over me because he felt guilty about what happened to my father. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because your father made me promise something else, Samuel said. He made me promise that if you ever achieved real success, if you built something meaningful, I would tell you the truth. He wanted you to know that you weren't alone in your struggle, that you came from a line of brilliant people who were dismissed and overlooked, but who never stopped believing in the value of ideas and human dignity. He wanted you to know your success wasn't despite what happened to him, but in some way because of it. The lessons he taught you about resilience and building something undeniable, those came from his own painful experience. Samuel pulled out a letter, yellowed and carefully preserved. He wrote this 2 months before he died. Asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. My father's handwriting on the front. For Marcus, when he understands. I couldn't open the letter there in the restaurant. I thanked Samuel, exchanged contact information, promised to meet again soon, and drove home in a daze. The letter sat on my passenger seat like a living thing, simultaneously drawing me toward it and filling me with fear about what it might contain. In my apartment, I sat on the couch where I had spent so many nights coding, building Binnacle solutions from nothing. I opened the envelope carefully, preserving every part of it, and began to read my father's words written 3 years ago when he was still alive, still watching me struggle at Nanotech, still believing I would eventually find my way. My dear Marcus, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've succeeded. It means you've built something meaningful, something that matters, something that proves talent and determination can overcome closed doors. I'm proud of you, though I won't be there to say it in person. By now, Samuel has told you about my past, about the career I had before I became a janitor. I want to explain why I never told you myself. I could say it was to protect you from bitterness, and that's partly true. But the deeper truth is that I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had let someone else's opinion define my worth. Ashamed that I had given up fighting for my place in the industry I loved. Ashamed that I couldn't give you the life I had dreamed of providing. But over the years, I realized something important. My career might have been destroyed by bad leadership, but my life wasn't. I had your mother. I had you. I had dignity and purpose, even if it wasn't in the form I had imagined. And most importantly, I had the opportunity to teach you something I couldn't have taught you if I had stayed in engineering. That your worth isn't determined by your job title, and success isn't about reaching some external destination. It's about maintaining your integrity, treating people with respect, and building something that makes the world slightly better. I watched you at Nanotech, watched you being dismissed and overlooked, and it broke my heart because I knew exactly how it felt. But I also knew you were stronger than I had been. You were preparing, learning, building something in the shadows that would eventually prove everyone wrong. I saw your AI platform prototypes. I understood their potential, even if Richard Caldwell didn't. And I knew that when you were ready, you would leave and build something extraordinary. Samuel feels guilty about what happened to me, which is why he'll help you in small ways. Let him. His guilt is his burden to carry, and his help is his way of seeking redemption. But never forget that your success is yours. The ideas are yours. The resilience is yours. The leadership is yours. You earned every bit of it. If you've achieved the success I believe you will, you'll face a choice now. You can use that success to prove you're better than the people who dismissed you, or you can use it to change the system that allows dismissive people to waste talent. I hope you choose the latter. I hope you build something that gives others the opportunities one never got. I hope you prove that business can value people and profit simultaneously. Most importantly, I hope you're happy. Not just successful, but genuinely happy. Because that's what I wanted most for you. A life where your talents are recognized, your ideas are valued, and your heart is at peace. I love you, Marcus. I'm proud of the man you've become. And I'm grateful that my struggles could teach you something valuable, even if I wish the lesson had come easier. Your father, James Bennett. I read the letter 3 times, crying harder each time, mourning not just my father but the career he should have had, the recognition he deserved, the decades he spent invisible because one bad leader had crushed his spirit. But I also felt profound gratitude. Gratitude that he had channeled his pain into wisdom instead of bitterness. Gratitude that he had taught me to see value in every person regardless of their title. Gratitude that his story had become the foundation for everything I built. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my core leadership team. Sienna, Leon, Paolo, Trevor, Richard, and now Felix. I told them everything Samuel had revealed, about my father's hidden past, about the helping hand I hadn't known existed, about the letter. So some of our early success wasn't entirely organic, Leon said carefully. Does that change anything? It changes how I understand our story, I said. But it doesn't change what we built or why it matters. My father's letter was right. The ideas were ours. The execution was ours. The culture was ours. Samuel opened a few doors slightly earlier than they might have opened naturally, but we're the ones who walked through them and built an empire. Sienna leaned forward. What do you want to do with this information? I thought about that question for several days. What did I want to do with this revelation about my father's past and Samuel's secret assistance? The easy answer was nothing, to keep it private, to maintain the narrative of the self-made entrepreneur who overcame obstacles through pure determination. But that narrative, I realized, was part of the problem. We lived in a culture that worshipped the myth of the completely self-made success story, which made everyone who needed help feel like they were cheating or weak. The truth was that most successful people had help, had mentors, had lucky breaks, had doors opened by others. Pretending otherwise didn't inspire people. It just made them feel inadequate when they needed assistance. I decided to tell the story publicly. Not to diminish my achievements, but to honor my father's memory and to make a larger point about how success actually works. I wrote an article for a major business publication titled The Janitor's Son, What My Father's Hidden Past Taught Me About Success and Dignity. In it, I told the complete story. My father's early career as an engineer, his destruction by toxic leadership, his decades working as a janitor while maintaining his dignity and curiosity, his secret lessons embedded in how he raised me. I revealed Samuel Hayes' role in opening early doors, and I explained why that didn't diminish what we had built. Success, I wrote, is rarely a solo journey. My father taught me to build something undeniable, but Samuel Hayes helped me get it in front of people who could recognize its value. Both were essential. We need to stop worshiping the myth of the completely self-made success and start being honest about how achievement actually happens. Through a combination of talent, effort, resilience, and help from others. The goal shouldn't be to succeed alone. It should be to succeed in ways that allow you to help others do the same. The article went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been shared over 1 million times. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people from all walks of life responded with their own stories of hidden help, lucky breaks, and assistance they had been reluctant to acknowledge. The conversation shifted from how I did it alone to how we can help each other succeed. But the most meaningful response came from Samuel Hayes himself. He called me the day after the article published, his voice thick with emotion. "Marcus, thank you for telling the truth. I've carried guilt about your father for 40 years, feeling like I failed him by not protecting him from Harrison Cole. But reading your article, understanding how his experience shaped you, seeing what you've built in his honor, it doesn't erase my guilt, but it gives it meaning. Your father's suffering wasn't pointless. It became the foundation for something that's helping thousands of people." "Samuel," I said, "I want you to join the Pinnacle Foundation Board. You have decades of experience. You understand what it's like to see talent being wasted, and your presence would honor my father's memory. Will you do it?" There was a long pause. Then, "Yes. I would be honored. Your father would be proud of what you've built, Marcus. Not just the company or the foundation, but the man you've become. You took pain and turned it into purpose. That's the rarest kind of success." Over the following months, Samuel became deeply involved with the foundation. His network, accumulated over 50 years in the tech industry, opened doors we couldn't have accessed otherwise. His mentorship helped our founders avoid mistakes that had taken him decades to understand. His presence was a constant reminder that success wasn't about individual glory but about collective elevation. One afternoon, Samuel and I were reviewing applications for our next cohort of foundation founders when he paused on one particular submission. "Marcus, look at this one. Her name is Zara Henderson. She's been working as a receptionist at a software company for 8 years. She has a fully developed AI platform for healthcare diagnostics that management dismissed as outside her expertise. Does this sound familiar?" I read Zara's application. Her story was almost identical to mine. Brilliant idea, dismissive management, years of being told she wasn't qualified to have opinions about technology despite having taught herself to code. Her platform could analyze medical images with accuracy that rivaled or exceeded human radiologists, potentially saving thousands of lives through early detection of diseases. "We're funding her," I said immediately. "And Samuel, I want you to personally mentor her. You saw my father's potential get wasted. You helped me succeed. Now help her become what she's capable of being." Zara Henderson became one of our most successful foundation founders. Within 18 months, her healthcare diagnostic platform was being used in hospitals across 3 states. Within 2 years, she had raised $40 million in venture capital and was being called a pioneer in medical AI. And she never forgot where she came from or who had helped her get there. 3 years after I walked out of Nanotech Industries with my cardboard box, we held a special event. It wasn't a company celebration or a product launch. It was something more personal and more important. We were dedicating a new initiative, the James Bennett Center for Overlooked Talent. The center would be a physical space and a comprehensive program. Any person working in any industry who felt their ideas were being dismissed could come to the center for assessment, development, and support. We would evaluate their concepts, help refine them, provide resources for development, and create pathways to implementation either within their current companies or through new ventures. The dedication ceremony was held on a Saturday afternoon in March, exactly 3 years to the day from when Richard Caldwell had told me maybe next year. Over 1,000 people attended, employees, foundation founders, clients, industry leaders, and journalists. But the guest of honor was my mother. She stood beside the bronze plaque we were unveiling, her eyes red from crying, her hand trembling as she touched my father's name engraved in metal. James Bennett, engineer, janitor, father, visionary. His dignity inspired a revolution. I addressed the crowd, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. My father worked as a janitor for 20 years. Every night, he came home exhausted but never defeated. He taught me that your worth isn't determined by your job title, and that closed doors aren't verdicts. They're just obstacles requiring different strategies. He taught me to build something so undeniable that all closed doors become irrelevant. And most importantly, he taught me that true success isn't about what you achieve for yourself, but what you make possible for others. I looked around at the faces in the crowd. Trevor Huang, who had gone from dismissed analyst to division leader. Paulo Gutierrez, whose quantum algorithm had been rescued from a drawer. Felix Moreno, who had gone from invisible custodian to operations manager. Keisha Williams, whose logistics platform was transforming an industry. Craig Donovan, who had transformed from toxic manager to effective leader. And Richard Caldwell, who had journeyed from being my worst boss to one of my most valuable colleagues. 3 years ago, I was told, maybe next year, for the third time. That phrase could have been the end of my story. Instead, it became the beginning. Not because I was special or unique, but because I had been taught by a man who understood that rejection is only permanent if you accept it as truth. My father knew something that took me years to fully understand. The people who dismiss you aren't always right. Sometimes they're just limited in their vision. And your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to build something so good, so undeniable, so transformative that their opinion becomes irrelevant. I paused, gathering myself for the final part of my speech. But here's what I've learned since then, the lesson that matters more than any business success. Building something undeniable isn't enough. You have to use what you build to change the system that made you feel worthless in the first place. You have to create pathways for others. You have to prove that the problem wasn't you. It was a culture that couldn't recognize talent when it didn't fit traditional patterns. I gestured to the building behind me, the new James Bennett Center. This center represents that commitment. Every person who enters these doors will be seen, valued, and given a genuine chance to develop their potential. No one will be dismissed because of their current job title. No one will be told they're not qualified to have ideas. No one will be made to feel invisible. Because my father deserves a legacy that prevents what happened to him from happening to others. After the ceremony, people approached with their own stories. A woman who had been told she was too emotional to lead but was now running a successful non-profit. A man who had been dismissed as just a technician but had developed a patent worth millions. A young person who had been told they were too inexperienced but was now disrupting an entire industry. Story after story of talent overlooked, potential dismissed, dignity challenged, and ultimately, success achieved despite the obstacles. But the conversation that mattered most happened late that evening, after everyone had left. My mother and I stood alone in the empty center, looking at my father's plaque. "He would be so proud," she said quietly. "Not just of your success, but of your heart. You could have used your achievements to prove you're better than the people who dismissed you. Instead, you used them to make sure others don't have to fight as hard as you did. That's wisdom, Marcus. That's character." "I learned it from him," I said. "From watching him maintain his dignity even when the world told him he didn't matter. From seeing him come home exhausted but never bitter. From understanding that his worth wasn't determined by whether his bosses recognized it." "Do you know what he told me the week before he died?" my mother asked. "He said, 'I'm not sad about my career anymore. What happened to me gave Marcus the lessons he needed to build something important. If my pain could become his purpose, then it wasn't wasted.' He saw meaning in his suffering because of what you would do with those lessons." We stood in silence for a long moment, honoring his memory, feeling his presence in the building we had created, in the mission we had committed to, in the lives we would change. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey from that conference room 3 years ago to this moment. I had been told, maybe next year, and had responded by building a company that was now worth over $800 million. I had acquired the company that dismissed me and transformed it into a model of effective leadership. I had created a foundation that was helping hundreds of overlooked people build their own ventures. I had established a center that would serve thousands more. But the real achievement wasn't the money or the recognition or even the business success. The real achievement was proving something my father had believed but never got to see validated in his own career. That dignity matters, that every person has value regardless of their title, that the best response to being dismissed isn't revenge but building something so good that you can afford to be generous even to those who doubted you. My phone rang. It was Sienna. "Marcus, I know it's late, but I had to call. Do you remember when you hired me away from Nanotech 2 years ago? You told me something that I didn't fully understand at the time. You said, the goal isn't just to succeed. It's to succeed in ways that make it easier for others to succeed after you. I finally understand what you meant. Tonight, watching that dedication, seeing all the people whose lives have changed because you refused to let rejection define you, I understand. You didn't just build a company. You built a movement. We built it, I corrected. Everyone who believed in the mission, who took a risk, who contributed their talents, who transformed themselves, we built it together. That's the point, Sienna. Success was never supposed to be a solo achievement. It was supposed to be collective elevation. After we hung up, I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my apartment. The same place where I had coded until midnight, where I had built Binnacle solutions from nothing, where I had cried reading my father's letter. So much had changed in 3 years. But the core lesson remained the same, the one my father had taught me through his example rather than his words. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it, and the best way to honor those who couldn't achieve their dreams is to build a world where others can achieve theirs. I walked inside, made tea the way my father used to make it, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, someone was sitting in a conference room being told, maybe next year. Someone was having their brilliant idea dismissed. Someone was feeling invisible, overlooked, worthless. But now, because of what we had built, they had options. They had the Pinnacle Foundation. They had the James Bennett Center. They had proof that rejection isn't permanent, that closed doors can be circumvented, that talent overlooked can become talent undeniable. My phone buzzed with a final message for the night. It was from Richard Caldwell. 3 years ago, I told you maybe next year, and thought I was putting you in your place. Tonight, I stood in a building named after your father, watching you receive recognition from industry leaders, seeing the empire you built from the scraps of dignity I tried to deny you. I want you to know something, Marcus. You didn't just prove me wrong. You taught me what leadership actually means. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing potential in me, even when I couldn't see it in you or anyone else. You made me better by refusing to let my worst behavior define either of us. I typed back, we're all works in progress, Richard. The difference between who we were and who we become depends on whether someone believes we're capable of change. My father believed it about me. I believed it about you. Now we both believe it about everyone who walks through the doors of the James Bennett Center. That's the legacy, not perfection, but continuous growth toward becoming better versions of ourselves. I set down my phone and raised my cup of tea toward the window, toward the city, toward the universe, toward my father's memory. We did it, Dad, I whispered. Not just success, but meaning. Not just achievement, but purpose. Not just proving them wrong, but building something right. Your pain wasn't wasted. Your lessons weren't forgotten. And your dream of a world where everyone is valued regardless of their title? We're making it real, one overlooked person at a time. The tea was warm, the night was quiet, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt complete peace. Not because the work was done, it would never be fully done, but because I finally understood what my father had known all along. Success isn't a destination you reach. It's a direction you travel. And the only measure that matters is whether you're moving toward a world where more people have more opportunities to discover and contribute their best selves. That was the real answer to, maybe next year. Not anger, not revenge, not bitterness. Just building something so good, so meaningful, so transformative that eventually, maybe next year, becomes irrelevant because you're too busy changing the world to care what closed-minded leaders think. And that, I realized, was exactly what my father had hoped I would learn. This is the end of my story.